My name is Sean Fracek, and I am the president and co-founder of Mythicist Milwaukee. We're a group in Milwaukee that is focused on secular events, projects, to kind of create a secular community in Milwaukee that is absent,
Awesome. What up, people? I'm the Godless engineer. And in case you didn't catch that, that was Sean Fracek of Mythicist Milwaukee. And I've really grown this great attachment to the Mythicist Milwaukee group. As you know, I traveled up to Milwaukee a few weeks back for the Carrier versus Bass debate, and I was able to get a few interviews. And Sean Fracek is one of the co-founders of Mythicist Milwaukee. You just heard him say, kind of who he was and who he is in relation to Mythicist Milwaukee. The next question I asked was about hobbies, though. Just wondering if he has any hobbies outside of Mythicist Milwaukee, whether or not this has a forefront in his personal life, or if it kind of takes a back seat to it, or what. And what I found out was that he has as much passion as I do about the secular community, about atheism, about mythicism. And but Sean, he really takes it one step further, because I asked him about hobbies, and what I got was just an amazing story about how the secular community in Milwaukee found their voice through Sean's dedication and his work on this group, Mythicist Milwaukee. Not just on the mythicism part, not on myths in general, but in providing a voice for the secular community of Milwaukee. And that's what their focus is. And as you'll hear in a minute, he went through great lengths after just one simple viewing of a movie that is now considered kind of a bane amongst a lot of individuals in the community. But he used the movie to do something great and powerful, and I really applaud him for the work that he's done, how far he has come since instantiating Mythicist Milwaukee, and just the amount of time and effort and what he has crafted has been so immensely successful that they are now actually helping with organizing Reason Rally. They are one of the groups that is really putting in a lot of work to getting Reason Rally to be just the hit, spectacular thing that everybody wants it to be. And so I love the fact that I have such a close relationship with them. And what you're about to hear in a minute is how sitting down with a friend and viewing a movie sparked an interest that grew into an 18-person organization that is leading up on organizing at Reason Rally. And I urge you to really just pay attention to the entire story that Sean has to tell, because it's really just fascinating as hell. I hope you enjoy it. I hope that you'll watch it all the way through and you'll get to the end, and let me know what you think as the interview goes on.
That's a good question. Hobbies. Well, I've been so consumed by my professional life at the same time. This organization, what people don't understand, literally we meet every Sunday for 6 to 8 hours. And then during the week, we do various events, meetup events. And then we're constantly texting back and forth, Facebook messaging. So really, I actually did the math, and it's 20 hours a week I spend on Mythicist Milwaukee. So tie that into my professional career, and there go my hobbies. I guess my one hobby would be beating Brian Edward in golf and Mario Kart. We had a little war last night over golf. Brian thinks he's really good, but outside of that, no, that's pretty much it. Just beating Brian at all the games we play. So 3 years ago, in 2013, we saw the film Zeitgeist. Now I know you're gonna get some trolls on here talking about how bad Zeitgeist was and things of that nature, but what Zeitgeist did, and I'm talking about part one of Zeitgeist, I'm not talking about the truther or the economic version of Zeitgeist. I'm just talking about the religion piece that Peter Joseph created. What it did for us, my co-founder Fritz and I saw that, and it just shocked us. Like there was information with the Christ myth theory where it was talking about how Jesus may or may not have done some of the things that we've always thought he did, resurrected, existed, all of these things. So now I understand the scholarship. Some of the scholarship is bad in that, but what Peter Joseph did with that film is he took various scholars' information, cobbled them together into this documentary, and it did really well. It was millions and millions and millions of views. And for Fritz and I, we saw it and we're like, man, we got to try and help get this information out. How can we help get the word out? Because we just don't think a lot of people like us didn't know. So we really got excited. So what we ended up doing is doing our own research. Being the skeptics we are, we were like, okay, this seems a little too easy. Something's not right here. So we started digging into our own research, and we ended up finding the author D.M. Murdoch. AKA Acharya S. Unfortunately, she has passed. She has actually died on Christmas Day, ironically enough, in 2015. But she was our inspiration. She reached back to us. We told her how excited we were about this information. We started reading her books. We started finding authors like Richard Carrier and Robert Price and David Fitzgerald. And we just kept we were just so excited about this information. We really wanted to get it out. So our first step was to create a Facebook page. So in 2013, we created the Facebook page, Mythicist Milwaukee, and that's all we were at the time. And we were just so driven to find out more and more and more about this information. So, we decided let's put our money where our mouth is. Let's try and figure this thing out. So I actually traveled to Egypt in 2013, which was not really recommended by the United States government at the time. It was right before the Second Revolution. So we traveled there, and I went to Giza, I went to Queen Hatshepsut's temple, all the various sites, and we paid professional scholars in Egypt to take us around to the various sites, explain what the stories were, getting more in depth into our research. And a lot of the stuff they were telling us was stuff we knew, and they were showing us this is the model of what we know as religion today. So we started, so it was really interesting to us to kind of see where religion started and what it looks like today as it has evolved from antiquity to now. So I mean, that was really, really inspiring. That's kind of how that, and from there, after the Egypt trip, we came back, and one of the things that I experienced when I was in Egypt that I never experienced before was the mandatory daily calls of prayer. For in Islam, it's the adhan, it's the 5 mandatory prayers. And in Egypt, this place, I mean, is a gorgeous place, unbelievable in history. But they couldn't even do simple things like pick up garbage. People were burning garbage in the street because no one was picking up garbage. 50% of the population at that point was unemployed. We were just getting hounded left and right because people were just impoverished, and it was really sad. The guides told us stories about how extremist Muslim groups were actually attacking the popular sites like the pyramids and the temples, and raiding the temples, and it was just a really sad experience. And but then I experienced this thing. Egypt invested in the infrastructure to essentially put air raid horns around the entire country. So when the Muslim call of prayer happens 5 times a day, you can hear it anywhere you're in the country. And that was something that I never experienced before. And this was, it follows the cycle of the sun based on when the calls to prayer occur. So So it'd be as early as like, we heard some as early as 3 a.m., some as late as 11 o'clock. It was very disrupting. I like didn't sleep at all. I was like sleep deprived because it's like right outside our hotel. It's going off, and it's something that you're not used to. So, I brought this notion back, and I took it to Fritz right away. And at this time, it's just me and Fritz still. And I'm like, there's something to this. Like, I personally don't think this would ever happen in the United States. And Fritz, being the person that he is always trying to prove me wrong. He's literally looked it up and right away was like, wrong. It's happening in Hamtramck, Michigan, and subsequently Dearborn, Michigan, which is 2 towns in Michigan that neighbor one another. And they actually went through U.S. legislation and got the noise ordinance in the city changed, so they were allowed to publicly broadcast the call to prayer. And we thought that was very interesting, mind-boggling. Like, this thing, for those that don't know, although it's in Arabic, it's stating very like powerful messages, like Muhammad's the only messenger, Allah's the only God, things that literally showcase the supremacy over other religions and faiths. But it's in Arabic. So, like, in Michigan, what is this doing in Michigan? So that was the question we asked ourselves. What does the Muslim call to prayer look like in the United States? So being as enthused and energized as we were, we had like a $500 budget. We drove down to Hamtramck, so to film a documentary. We wanted to see what that practice was doing to the town. What people know about it, how it's influenced like policy and things like that. So we drove down, and we drove overnight. So we drove from Milwaukee to Hamtramck, which is like 6 or 8 hours. So we literally left Milwaukee at like 10 o'clock to get there at 6 a.m. because at the time they were broadcasting as early as 6 a.m. So that's what coined the title Night Journey to Hamtramck, because in the story, the reason why Muslims pray 5 times a day is because Muhammad took a trip to see Allah, and there's a lot of people out there probably know this, but he actually flew on a horse with a human head up to with the angel Gabriel. Gabriel escorts him to the 7 layers of heaven, where he meets various Abrahamic faiths, figures like Moses or Abraham, Jesus. He meets Jesus actually. He does all these things, and he meets Allah. And what a lot of people don't know is actually in the scripture, originally Allah tells Muhammad that they have to pray 50 times a day. So 50 times a day, like we did the math, like that would be literally 24 hours almost of praying. And in the story, Allah tells Muhammad 50 times, and as Allah's coming back down on the Barak, this horse with the human head, Moses interjects and is like, 50's too much. You need to go back and tell Allah 45. So he does that. He comes back. It's still too much. You got to go back to Allah and tell him 40. He comes back. Still too much. And this keeps occurring until finally he negotiates down to 5 times a day. And Muhammad comes back and he meets Moses again. And Moses is like, 5, that's still too much, right? That's still too much. And but so Muhammad says, no, I've visited my God way too many times. I'm not going to do it again. So he comes back down with the laws of 5 times a day. So that's where they get the 5 mandatory prayers a day. And it's interesting because like somehow Moses is wiser than Allah in this story somehow. I don't know. Allah's all knowing, right? So that's where that comes from. So our title was Night Journey to Hamtramck, playing on that story. So we go to Hamtramck and we interview the citizens, and this is where it gets interesting, and this is where I think your work is important and everyone's work is important that in the secular world, because when we showed up in Hamtramck, it was like you could cut the tension with a knife in the air, the tension in the air with a knife. And one of the stories that we share behind the scenes to illustrate this was the idea is we're just going out there to film a documentary and ask questions. No big deal. Like it happens all the time. I can go anywhere and just film something and ask questions and get people's approval to be in the film, and if they sign off, great. We go there, and this is the sole focus, is to do that. So we're sitting outside the mosque in Hamtramck, and it was supposed to happen at 6. Now, we didn't know, because we're outsiders, we didn't know that it changes day to day. Sometimes it's at 6, sometimes it's at 8, sometimes it's at 1. And actually, they have passed legislation to be allowed to publicly broadcast 5 times a day, but they decided to whittle that down to only 1 public and then 4 inside the mosque because they were getting a lot of complaints from the neighbors. But they can do 5 times. They can go back to 5 times anytime they want. So we got that information. So we're literally sitting outside of the mosque with a camera, which already looks goofy, at 6 a.m., right? And a police officer drives by and he's like staring us down, like, what are you doing? And he didn't stop or say anything. So I was like, okay. But then we go to, and this is the story that kind of tells the whole thing. We go to a local restaurant to talk to some employees there. The restaurant's right across from the mosque. We walk over there to ask some questions, get some information, and we walk in and we start talking to the employees there, and they're very nice. And, we're like, hey, we're out of Milwaukee. We want to do a documentary. And they're like, oh, great. That's great. What is it about? And then we tell them. We're like, oh, it's about the public broadcast of the Muslim call of prayer. And we had one cook come out, and he was like so excited about being in this documentary. He's like, I would love to be in this documentary. This documentary sounds great. What is it about? And we told him, and he shook our hands and said, good luck with that. And he walked back into the kitchen. Completely like he didn't want anything to do with it. So we're like, it was really bizarre. We're there, we're like, no one wants to talk to us about this, what's going on. And then we had a waitress come up to us as we were leaving, secretly hand us her phone number and said, I really want to talk about this. I can't be seen in public talking to you guys, but here, take my number. And we ended up calling her later on the next day and getting her in the film, and she was great. She's in a household where her father's Muslim and her mother isn't, so she's like half and half. Like I forgot what I think her mother was Christian, but her father really he was kind of he set the tone for the family. So they're very conservative Muslim. So it was interesting, and she was telling us one of the stories in the film. And for those that want to see the film, really forgive the quality of the film and the audio and everything. But again, it's $500 budget. It's our first real project. But we got some really good stuff in there. Some people, like for her, in her case, she told us a story about how Hamtramck was trying to open an LGBTQ friendly bar, right? And her father started a petition to keep this out because it goes against Islamic faith. And he got a bunch of his friends to rally, and they signed this petition. And based on what she says, I haven't researched this because I didn't know where to look, but it sounded like their petition was successful and they kept this bar out of the town. But you'll see it. I mean, they just in Hamtramck, they just voted in their first Islamic mayor, I believe it was. It was either mayor, I think it was mayor. Someone definitely high up in the city government. So it's interesting. It's a really interesting look at like what Islam looks like in the U.S. Now it's different than what it looks like in Egypt at this point. But it's interesting kind of seeing the culture change. But so yeah, that was like one of our first big projects. We were excited about that. So feel free to look it up. Night Journey to Hamtramck. The Milwaukee Public Television actually approached us to show it, potentially show the film. Unfortunately, they declined after further review just because the audio was so bad. They were like, if you guys had had good audio, we definitely would have shown this. So it is a topic that's coming ahead. It's it's interesting. And as the Islamic communities grow in the U.S., it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But yeah, that was our first big project. We always want to try something new, challenge the status quo, do things that are that get people thinking. And after that, we came back. We started focusing locally on the community. We wanted to do like events. We held the first ever atheist conference in Milwaukee last year, 2015 in April. And then we ran the second ever atheist conference in Milwaukee in September of 2015. And then that actually attracted a killer priest from the Wu-Tang Clan. That was his first ever talk, so really proud to have worked with him and his management on that. So yeah, we're always, the team's grown now in 3 years. We started with just 2. We're up to 18 people on the team, and everyone's just doing such a great job. And that's the one thing we try to strive for is it's not about me, it's not about Fritz, it's not about Brian, it's about the team. And we're really focused on, everyone plays their part, everyone does, something that brings something to the table. And it's been working out really great. And I'm sure we'll get into the debate series a little bit later, but so our focus is to challenge the religious concepts that we know today out of the Abrahamic faiths and showcase where this stuff is coming from. And in order to do that, again, we're doing events, we're doing movies, we're doing a bunch of projects. We're partnering with the Reason Rally, things like that. That's our main goal, and then also a secondary goal is to grow the secular community that doesn't exist in Milwaukee right now. We're trying to create something where those that are secular have somewhere to go, because you get shunned a lot of times, especially when the topic of religion comes up. No one wants to talk about it. Secular people don't really have an area or like a place to go and share their ideas, because they're deemed in Milwaukee as a very conservative city. Secular ideas are weird and like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you believe what we believe? So that's what we're about.
Well, that was Sean Fracek of Mythicist Milwaukee. I appreciate you making it all the way up to this point. Please do go subscribe to Mythicist Milwaukee. I will be putting out more interviews from the other founders and people at the forefront of the group, including Fritz, as you heard Sean talk about in the interview, and Rob Moore. I will be having other members come on and do interviews in the coming months leading up to the debate in October, I believe it is. And so I hope that you'll go down there, subscribe to them. They put out great content. They have a weekly broadcast that they do on Sundays. I hope that you'll keep an eye out for that. Like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter, as well as subscribe to my channel so that you can keep up with more mythicism and mythicist-related material. And I hope you guys have a great night, and I'll see you later.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe to GE, Mythicist Milwaukee. Check out the debate coming up in October between Bart Ehrman and Robert Price. And check out Batman and Jesus. That's going to be a cool concept that I think a lot of people can really rally around. It's really exciting for us. So thank you so much.